In this video, we start on the Data and Operations chapter with a sample C# program. Let's actually try running this program. We'll talk later about how to get this going on your computer. This is a silly little short program. We're going to enter room dimensions. It says here, enter room length. So let's make it 20.5. I'll hit the return key. And it then prompts me for another number, enter room width, let's say 10. And then this is what the program generates. The wall area is 488 square feet, and the ceiling area is 205 square feet. So presumably my units were in feet. And this is very simple. I'm ignoring doors and windows in a rectangular room. We're done with that. And here's the same output in the notes. Let's look at the source code, the file that you would write to make such a program run. We're going to go over this stuff in more detail later, but this is an introduction, and it'll give somewhat of an introduction to some things and a fairly major introduction to others with, more to follow. First of all, the amount of code written in C# is enormous, and certainly not everybody knows what everybody else is writing. And if everybody had to write things to avoid the names of other things that people wrote, we'd have real trouble. C# employs namespaces, and the namespace system is used for the main system code that's used in all sorts of programs. And so we are using system, followed by a semicolon, and all of our programs will start this way. You will later see that we can use other things also, but this is the basics. All code in C# program sits in classes. So here we have a standard sort of heading. The word class, because it's a class, and it must have a name, and I'm calling this painting for our room painting calculations. So this is the heading for this class, and the class then has a body. The body always starts with a curly brace and ends with a matching close curly brace. Inside of our class, there has to be a place where the program starts. And the code is split up into functions, which are a generalization of the idea of a mathematical function that you're probably useful. In particular, the program will start at a place that includes static void main. Let me explain the pieces at least in part. C# is a modern object-oriented programming language. Object orientation is very good for enormous projects or moderate-sized projects, and it's not a good thing for really small projects usually, or certainly when you're just starting to learn. So we are not going to start with object-oriented programming. It's going to be more procedural programming, which is historically an older format. However, C# is skewed towards object-oriented programming. And if you have a function that is not tied in with maintaining an object, as in object-oriented programming, then there's an extra word that's required, static. And so until we get to object-oriented programs, all of our functions are going to have static there. Next, you're used to mathematical functions that produce some result, like the squaring function or something. One way that functions are more general in C# and other languages is that the name and the syntax for function is allowed for something that just does something. Like, remember, our program just produced output on the screen. So if a function does not return or produce a result in a mathematical sense, it is void. Main will always be void. And finally, the specific name that the starting point of your program must have is main, and all functions are partly indicated by parentheses after them. Many functions will have parameters inside. This does not necessarily. So this is going to be our simplest way of starting a main program. That is the heading there, and like a class, a function has a body also enclosed in curly braces. And then inside of that, we have the various statements that make up the program. First of all, a comment here that you see different colors. Modern editors make different parts of the language syntactically different colors. It makes it easier to keep track of errors and things. Reserved words like this static here, you see I'm showing in green, and this is a type, and I'll discuss more about this later. We are going to store data. For instance, remember we asked for the width and the length of the room. We're going to store that data in variables, width, you see, and length. All data in C# has a type, and double is a not very intelligible name we'll give some motivation for later, but what it means is something that represents a real number with a considerable amount of precision. And so this is a declaration. It's saying that we have these various variables here that are of type double. They all represent real numbers. And we have a comma-separated list. Another kind of data is strings, just a sequence of characters. And so here we are declaring two string variables, width string and length string. Here I do something slightly different. I'm also declaring a double or real value here. Here it's going to be just a name that I'm using for a consistent constant value. And this is not required, but it's a convention in C# that something that you just use as a name for a constant is all capitals. So we're assuming the height of our room is a standard modern construction, 8 feet tall. Now we go on to the first line that does something visible. Console refers to this window here where we were typing in and seeing results printed out from the program. Associated with the console, we can write something to the screen. If you remember, on the screen here appeared calculation of room paint requirements. That's exactly what's in quotes here. This is a string with, concrete data in it enclosed in quotes. And the console has a function that will write a line, which is what, of course, appeared on the screen. And it is a function, and so the parameter, the thing that is going to be written to the screen, is inside the parentheses. And like other statements, we end here with a semicolon. And so this says, on the console, write a line. And if you look here, of course, that's what we did. We wrote a line. After that, we have something similar, console, now write instead of write line. And again, here's the parameter, another quoted string. And if we look back here, you see enter room length. Now what you'll notice here is that enter room length is on a separate line from what was printed previously. That is because the previous statement was with right line, and so it advanced to the next line where enter room length appeared. On the other hand, because this is only right and not right line, it stops here and does not advance to the next line. This string here is serving as a prompt telling the user to type something in. Prompt, I guess, fits in English. It's also a jargon in computer programming for what you do to tell the user to do something. And so you will see on the same line, we have where the user, I, typed in the number. And let's see, how does that work? We have another console operation. Of course, it was associated with that window. We are now reading a line that I typed in. Again, this is another function, so it must have parentheses after it. Now, this is in some sense closer to a garden variety mathematical function in that it gives back a result. And the result, in this case, is just going to be the string that I typed in, the 20.5. The way to use that result is to assign it, and the equal sign is not a mathematical equal sign, it is an assignment. It means take what was produced from this side, which in the end, what is returned by this function, that the character is 20.5, and we assign that to the variable on the left side. Remember, length string is of type string, and I typed in characters, so it's appropriate that what I typed is assigned to this variable length string. Now there's a problem with the different types here. We want to do some arithmetic with this length, and so we must convert the type from string to something that corresponds to a real number, a double. And the next line, we do that. Length string now stores that 20.5 sequence of characters. And we have another function. Double is associated with the type double. And there is an operation associated with that type, parse, and the dot binds it to that particular type. So double.parse is another function, this time with a parameter, the length string. Notice that though you're used to math typically working with numbers as parameters, there's no such requirement in C#. String is a perfectly good parameter. But this function then produces a value, namely the mathematical value associated with that 20.5, and this is another assignment. That value is then assigned to the variable on the left, again length, which is a double, which corresponds to a real number. Now we do pretty much the same thing again. This time we are asking to enter the room width. We again read a line which is assigned to the width string. Here you can look back and be reminded it was the same idea. Enter room width. So the next time the width string would be the characters 1, 0. And again, I want a mathematical width, and we do the function call for the transformation, which takes the string of characters digit 1, digit 0, applies the double.parse function, which converts it to a number, and we assign it to the width variable. So all of that is just getting data in from the user. Now, the guts of this silly little program is the next two lines to calculate our results. And if you look here, you'll see that this is math basically. Here the plus sign. In math, you are probably used to single character variables. Notice we can use multiple characters. However, the disadvantage of that is that multiplication cannot be implicit. You must have an explicit operation for multiply, and in C# and many languages it's this asterisk. The thing on the American keyboard is above the 8. And we have parentheses here, just like in math, that says do the addition first, and this says multiply this by 2. This ends up being the perimeter of the room at this point. And then if we multiply that all by our height, then we get the wall area. So we assign the calculated number to the wall area. Let's go back to the notes here. Let's go further down in the notes where I have this all explained. So again, we have this expression including the variables. When a variable is used in an expression, is as if you rewrite the expression with its value. You probably did that in math class. So length was 20.5 and width was 10. Our height, I gave a value all along as 8. And so this expression is the same as this, which is just an arithmetic expression, and it simplifies to 488. That is the numerical value then assigned, because of the equal sign, to this wall area variable. The ceiling area is simpler. It's just the length times the width. And again, the values of the length and the width are substituted to get that product. So now that we have calculated our results, we're going to display them for the user. This is a very simple paradigm of enter data, calculate results, display results. This is the simplest sort of a program. So let's look. Again, we are going to use the console.writeLine function. But here, what is in between the parentheses is considerably more complicated. Let's have a look at this. You can see a quoted string here. But what we want to do here is print out a sentence like we have over here. The wall area is like 488. Well, 488 isn't a canned sequence of characters that we know ahead of time. That's the value of our variable wall area. And you see how this is handled over here in C#. I can take a literal string here in quotes, and the plus sign here has a different meaning than here. Because everything has a type, C# knows these are numbers, and it does your run-of-the-mill arithmetic. But here I have a plus sign after a string, and it does something that would add on to a string in a manner that's appropriate for a string. When you add on to a string, it even sort of fits with English, you tack something on to the end of the string. The extra thing that this plus operator does is, since we are clearly producing a string, wall area does happen to be here a number, but it knows enough that since we are trying to produce a string, it converts it to a string, just a sequence of characters, and that is what is tacked on to the wall area is space and there. And then we can continue and tack on with the plus sign a further canned string. So again, you see here, this was the canned string. This was adding on the value converted to a string of the wall area, and this was the final canned string that we tacked on to the end. And that whole string then is between the parentheses here. The resulting expression is the parameter for this console.writeLine function, and that string got printed. The next statement is very similar, only this time we are using a different description. This time the ceiling area is, and again we tack in a conversion of the numerical ceiling area into a string, and again tack on the square feet to get the last line. And this last line here, press any key to continue, is just a part of the mono-develop system that we'll talk about later, because this window will disappear when we're done with it. And so I'm waiting to press the key in case we want to look at this again. So that is a general description of this program, and by the end of this chapter we'll have described pretty much everything in here in great detail, so you can write variations on this confidently. Still pretty simple stuff. Later chapters will get on to more elaborate things. So the written text here goes over the same things we were talking about. One other thing I want to show off here is you'll notice how we have indented and spaced this program, having a single statement generally be on one line, having the bodies indented inside of their braces and their braces lining up. These are all not for the computer, but for the human user to make it easier to follow. The computer doesn't care about that formatting. Look at the end here. First of all, white space is any consecutive combination of spaces, new lines, and tabs. And except in a quoted string, C# treats any amount of white space just the same as a single space. It separates basically words or keywords. On special symbols like our braces, semicolon, parentheses, etc. here, these special symbols do not require space around them. Hence, something that would be just as intelligible to the computer would be if our program were written like this. This is certainly not the way we encourage you to write it. That is not handy for humans at all. We will emphasize good white space conventions, and we will discuss them as we go on, and we will expect you to use them. Next section will go on to an even simpler program for you to run in the lab and get used to actually using the tools for C#.